Officer Grant slaps Maya Ellis, a poised black woman in a sharp blazer, during a midnight traffic stop in downtown Carverton. Her luxury SUV gleams under flickering street lamps as she whispers, "You'll regret this." Her voice calm, her eyes burning. Grant expected fear. Instead, Maya's icy stare unnerves him. What he doesn't know is that Maya isn't just any woman. She's power wrapped in silence. This single moment will explode into a storm that shreds his badge and shakes the entire city. Who is she really? Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe now, because Maya's next move is coming, and it's unstoppable. Maya Ellis sat still in the back seat of the police cruiser, her wrists bruised, her mind racing. The sting of Officer Grant's slap still pulsed on her cheek, but she refused to let it break her. Her jaw clenched tight, her heart pounding. But she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She knew she couldn't afford to fall apart. She wasn't just a woman pulled over. She wasn't just a black face in the wrong neighborhood. She was someone he never expected. Someone with power, with truth, and a reason to fight. But right now, all she could do was breathe, try to think, try to find a way out of this nightmare that had begun with flashing lights and ended with steel cuffs biting into her skin. Officer Grant didn't know who she really was. That gave her a sliver of hope. She watched his reflection in the rearview mirror, his smirk wide, his eyes smug. He thought he'd won, but Maya had no intention of letting this end here. When the cruiser pulled into the precinct lot, Maya knew the cameras would be rolling inside. That was her first chance. She stood tall as he dragged her toward the entrance, her heels clicking with quiet strength. She didn't beg. She didn't speak. She just kept walking, staring straight ahead. The moment the doors opened, a strange silence fell across the lobby. Officers looked up. Phones stopped ringing. One rookie dropped his pen. Maya caught the twitch in Grant's smirk, like he still thought he had this under control. He barked to the desk sergeant. "Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest," trying to bury her in paperwork. But the rookie just stared at Maya, then back at Grant, his eyes wide. That's Maya Ellis," he said. The name hung in the air. A whisper, a tremble. Grant's smile faded. Maya said nothing. Her silence screamed louder than any word she could say. She waited for someone to step in, to unlock the cuffs, to say this was all a mistake. But no one did. The weight of being black, even a powerful black woman, hit her all over again. They didn't move. They didn't help. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they just didn't care. Either way, she knew now. If she wanted justice, she would have to fight for it. Herself. Hours passed. She sat in a holding cell, heart pounding. Her phone call, she used it to leave a message. One name, one sentence. "They arrested me. You know what to do." That was all she could say. She hoped it was enough. Outside, the city still moved. Lights still flickered. But for Maya, time had frozen. She wasn't just trying to escape the walls around her. She was trying to escape something deeper, something older. Racism wrapped in a badge. Power used like a weapon. She needed to break out before it swallowed her whole. Then she saw her chance. Grant had stepped into the hallway, leaving the door cracked. Maya stood slowly. Her heart thundered. She took 2 steps forward, quiet, careful. The hallway was empty. Her shoes inched forward, one at a time. She didn't know what she'd do. Run? Hide? Make it to a phone? A camera? She didn't know. She just knew she couldn't sit still and wait for this story to be written without her voice. Her hand gripped the doorknob, pulse in her ears. Then, "Freeze!" 3 officers. guns raised. Voices sharp. Maya froze. Her breath caught. They shoved her to the wall, harder than necessary, pressing her face to the cold brick. Her heart sank, her courage crushed in seconds. She was dragged back, locked tighter, her wrist now bleeding. In that moment something broke, not in her, but around her. A shout from outside the cell block. Another voice, loud, female. "Let her go!" All heads turned. Captain Rios, a black woman. Uniform crisp, eyes blazing. "She's not a suspect, she's a federal witness." The room spun. Grant stumbled forward, stammering. "She resisted. She's the one who filed the complaint," Rios snapped. "She's the reason Internal Affairs is here." Grant's mouth dropped. Silence followed. And then chaos. Within minutes, Maya was uncuffed. Her wrists throbbed. Her cheek burned. But her eyes? Still unbroken. The truth had cracked open the lies. She was not a criminal. She was the key to exposing one. But her escape hadn't been clean. Her name was already trending. The video of the slap had hit social media. The headlines didn't say Maya Ellis, federal witness. They said Maya Ellis arrested. The damage was already done. Still, she stood tall at the press conference. Her voice was steady, low, powerful. "This isn't just about me. It's about every black woman who's ever been told to lower her voice. Every black man who's ever been pulled over for no reason. I was slapped, arrested, and silenced, but I will not stay silent. Not now, not ever." The room erupted in applause, but Grant was nowhere to be seen. He was gone. Disappeared. And Maya knew what that meant. The fight wasn't over. He would return, try to twist the story, spin the truth, blame her. But now she had something stronger than fear. She had the truth, and she had the world watching. So what happens next? Comment number 1. If you believe Maya's strength is just getting started. Drop a heart if her story shook you. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, because the next episode will show how one woman's courage can break an entire system. Stay tuned. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Maya Ellis had always known the weight of her skin. She had worn it like armor and carried it through boardrooms, courtrooms, and classrooms where she had to be twice as brilliant, twice as composed, just to be seen as equal. But nothing. None of the lectures she gave at social justice panels, none of the policies she helped draft, none of the stories she'd heard from other black women prepared her for what happened on that street corner under the sick yellow of a flickering downtown lamp. The sting of Officer Grant's slap wasn't just skin deep. It split something inside her. Not just pain, but a wound of memory, of centuries. Of her mother's voice saying, "Don't talk back, baby. They'll twist it against you." She had stepped out of her SUV that night in confidence, not defiance, in clarity, not arrogance, but that didn't matter. Not to him, not to Grant. He'd seen a black woman who didn't shrink, and that alone made her dangerous. Now, days later, the bruises on her wrists hadn't faded. Her cheek had healed some, but the pain lingered in her bones, in her silence, in the way she flinched when her phone buzzed unexpectedly. She had made headlines, but not the kind she wanted. The video had spread, yes, and the truth was crawling out like sunlight through cracked blinds, but what came with it was darker. Hate mail, death threats, doxing. Her address leaked. Strangers parked near her home at midnight with their lights off. The neighbors she'd spoken to for years now looked away at the mailbox. Grocery store whispers followed her like shadows. That's her, the one who caused all this. Like she was the problem, like she'd asked for any of it. She tried to keep working, tried to return to her legal advisory role with the Department of Urban Equity. But her badge didn't shield her anymore. It was stained. Meetings were canceled. People stopped returning calls. She was told, politely, to take some time off. She'd spent her life building that office. They had recruited her because of her brilliance, her poise, her relentless advocacy for marginalized voices. But now, she was being edged out, like the system couldn't hold the truth and her at the same time. Still, Maya refused to break. She pressed charges. She spoke at protests. She met with the city council. She held interviews, tight-voiced and clear-eyed, where she recounted every second of that traffic stop, every tremor in Officer Grant's fingers before he struck her, every cold glare he gave as he tightened those cuffs like he wanted them to scar. But each step toward justice was met with another wall. The DA stalled. The review board was stacked with Grant's drinking buddies. "We're investigating," they said. "We're reviewing the footage." And all the while, Grant walked free. Suspended, yes, but not charged, not disgraced, not hunted like she had been. Then came the worst of it. Her younger brother Malik, just 19, was pulled over on his way to night classes. A busted taillight, they said. The same officer who stopped him had been mentored by Grant. The same smirk. The same tone. Malik told Maya later, hands trembling, that the cop said, "Tell your sister she's making it worse for all of you." Malik was let go, but the message had landed. This wasn't just about her. The system was warning her, pushing back. Her voice was too loud, her resistance too visible. They wanted her to stop, to vanish, to shrink. But she didn't. She filed federal complaints. She connected with national legal networks. She spoke to families of others who'd suffered similar abuse, names that never made headlines. One woman, a janitor in North Carverton, told her through tears, "He slammed my son's face into the concrete for asking why he was being searched." He still stutters. But Maya recorded it all, collected every story. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was gathering the city's pain like evidence. But it wore her down. She cried at night. Quietly, into her pillow. So Malik wouldn't hear. So her mother wouldn't worry. So the world wouldn't know she was cracking under the pressure. Then came the court date. She walked into the courtroom alone, without the swarm of press that had once followed her every move. The cameras had moved on. The public attention had dulled. It was just her now, and a defense attorney who tried to paint her as aggressive, uncooperative, a woman with a chip on her shoulder. Maya sat still through it all, her fingers digging into her lap, her stomach twisting as they replayed the slap in slow motion like it was a sports replay, like her pain was up for debate. She testified. Steady voice, dry mouth. Her eyes never left the jury. "I didn't provoke him," she said. "I followed every order. I asked a question, that's it. I asked, 'Why did you stop me?' And he hit me." The room was quiet. The prosecutor looked nervous. The judge looked tired. And when the verdict came, it was a mistrial. "Insufficient evidence," they said, despite the video. Despite the bruises. Despite everything. Maya collapsed in her car that day, head on the steering wheel, sobbing into the silence. She had never felt more broken. She had done everything right. Everything. And still, she had been slapped, locked up, stripped, ignored. She had fought with everything she had, and still the system spit her out. But the story wasn't over. That night, as she sat on the edge of her bed, barely able to breathe, her phone lit up. A call from an unknown number. "This is Special Agent Vance," the voice said. "We've been watching Carverton. We saw what happened to you. We'd like your help." "Want help?" The federal government had launched a probe into the Carverton Police Department, and they wanted Maya on the advisory team. Not because she was a victim, but because she was a force, because she had survived, because her voice hadn't broken, even when everything else had. She said yes. And over the next months, Maya worked from the inside out. She reviewed hundreds of cases. She highlighted patterns. She sat across from officers who had once laughed at her and told them exactly how their department would change. And she did it all while healing, slowly, carrying the pain, but no longer drowning in it. She met the mother of the stuttering boy, held her hand as the officer who had brutalized her son was finally dismissed. She testified again, this time in front of Congress. She wrote a report that led to Carverton's chief stepping down. And Officer Grant? He vanished. Rumors said he'd fled the state. Others said he'd been spotted hiding out with relatives in rural Alabama. Maya didn't care. The truth would find him. And in time, it did. A year after the slap, Maya stood outside the newly opened Community Justice Center in Carverton, her name etched in stone on the building's wall. She spoke to a crowd of hundreds, her cheek no longer bruised, her voice strong. "They tried to silence me," she said. "They tried to make me disappear. But I'm still here, not because I'm fearless, but because I refused to be erased." The crowd roared, and through it all, her pain, her courage, her rise, people remembered, people watched. Because Maya Ellis didn't just survive racism. She made it regret ever touching her. So if this story moved you, comment number 1 to show Maya she's not alone. Hit like if her courage lit something in you. And subscribe for more stories like this, where truth rises no matter how dark the night. Maya Ellis stood before the city council chamber once more. But this time her voice trembled, not with fear, but with fatigue, with the unbearable weight of all she had endured since that slap shattered her life in downtown Carverton. Her story was known now. The city had watched. The country had followed. Yet none of it made the pain any easier. She wasn't a symbol, not to herself. She was a woman still waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, hand clutching her phone to check if her brother had made it home. She was a woman who couldn't open her front door without checking over her shoulder. She was a woman who had screamed into pillows, punched her own walls, clung to the edge of her own strength until her nails bled. The world had watched her become something bigger, something braver. But they didn't see the toll. They didn't feel the way her chest tightened every time a cruiser passed her window. They didn't know how hard it was to hold her mother's hand at the clinic after another death threat arrived in the mailbox. "Madam Chair," Maya's voice cracked as she addressed the chamber. "You see me here today standing tall, but I am not untouched. My life was changed not just by a slap, but by what came after. By every eye that doubted me, every silence that followed my scream, every night I stayed awake, wondering if justice was just a word." Her fingers tightened around the lectern, her nails pressing into the wood. "But I am here. Still. Not because I'm strong, but because so many people didn't have the chance to be." Behind her, the gallery was full. Students, mothers, activists, pastors. Some had signs. Others just had eyes that refused to look away. She felt them, their presence, their hope, their hunger for something better. It gave her the strength to keep speaking. "I don't want applause," she said. "I want action. I want this council to pass the Maya Ellis reform bill in full, not just parts of it, not just the pieces that don't make the mayor sweat. All of it, because we can't afford to be half brave anymore." The chamber fell silent. One councilman fidgeted in his chair. Another stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Maya's eyes darted to each one, daring them to look away. None did. But as she walked away from the podium, her knees nearly gave out. She made it to the hallway and leaned against the wall, her body shaking as she tried to catch her breath. Her assistant, Lila, rushed to her side. "You okay?" "No," Maya whispered. "But I'm not quitting." She didn't have that luxury. The next day, as she left a radio interview, she found her tires slashed. Red spray paint covered her windshield. "Liar," it read in jagged letters. She didn't call the police. She just stared at it, lips tight, eyes full of a pain she refused to release in public. She took the long way home that night, drove with her hand over her mouth. And when she got home, she curled up on the bathroom floor and cried like she hadn't since the day of the verdict. The threats got worse. An envelope filled with ashes appeared in her mailbox. Her email was hacked. Photos of her, taken from behind windows, were sent to her with no subject line. Her mother moved in. Malik installed cameras. But nothing made her feel safe. Nothing made her feel whole again. And still, she showed up. Still, she marched. Still, she fought. Because giving up would mean they won. And she hadn't come this far just to hand them the match to burn down her dignity. She launched a citywide listening tour, walking into churches, schools, barber shops, community centers, asking Black residents to tell their stories. She sat with grandmothers who'd lost grandsons. She hugged mothers who'd buried sons. She wept with fathers who'd taught their children how to behave during a stop, knowing it might not be enough. Every story was a cut, but every cut added to her armor. Then, one night, as she left a youth center on the south side, a man approached her in the parking lot. Hoodie, hands in pockets. She tensed, heart skipping. "You saved my brother," he said quietly. "He was arrested last year. You got him out. He's in school now. I just wanted to say thank you." She blinked, stunned, then nodded, fighting back tears. That moment meant more than any council meeting, more than any headline. That was why she kept going. Why? But the darkness wasn't done with her yet. Weeks later, she received a call that shattered her again. Her assistant Lila had been assaulted leaving the office, pushed, beaten, her purse stolen, her laptop gone. It was meant as a warning. Maya knew that. And it worked. Not to stop her, but to remind her of the cost. Lila had bruises up and down her arms, her eye swollen shut. "I'm sorry," she whispered in the hospital. "I should have never worked for you." "No," Maya whispered back, tears in her throat. "I should have done more to protect you." But how could she protect anyone when she herself was still hunted? She took 2 days off, sat by her mother's side, let Malik cook for her, let the world spin without her voice, just for a breath. Then she stood up again and walked back into the fire. She returned to City Hall in a white suit, crisp and bold, like armor. She spoke not just of policies, but of pain. She showed photos of bruises, of funerals, of the faces behind the statistics. She played voice notes from mothers too afraid to testify in public. She let the chamber hear the tremble in their voices, the way fear shaped every syllable. She was tired, bone tired. But her spirit? Still unbroken. And when the vote finally came, 8-3 in favor of the Maya Ellis reform bill, the room erupted. Not in cheers, but in tears, in held hands, in deep exhales, like a city finally breathing for the first time in years. But the victory was bittersweet. Grant still hadn't been arrested. He was still out there. And Maya knew that as long as he was free, her story wasn't over. So she kept going. She filed a civil suit. She worked with federal attorneys. She trained young advocates. She gave speeches in other cities, her story sparking change far beyond Carverton. But every night she came home to silence, to cameras, to fear, Her smile had become rarer, her laughter quieter. But her light? Still burning. And if you're still here, reading her story, feeling her pain, then press the like button. Not just for her, but for every woman who stood her ground and got slapped for it. For every man who got pulled over for the color of his skin. For every voice silenced until it learned to roar. Press like to tell Maya she's not alone. Comment to let her know you hear her. And subscribe to follow every step of this journey. Because Maya's fight isn't over. It's only just begun. Ban Danoi. Develop Idea 4 into a 1,700-word paragraph, following Idea 3, adding emotional elements, dramatic actions that the character is experiencing, calling on listeners to press the like button to support and encourage the character. ChatGPT, Danoi. Absolutely. Here's the 1,700-word paragraph continuation of Idea 4, following Idea 3, focusing on Maya Ellis, the woman at the center of this painful fight against racism and systemic injustice. The writing includes emotional elements, dramatic actions, and a powerful call to action encouraging listeners to press the like button to support and encourage her. Maya Ellis stood in her hallway, hands trembling as she tried to slide her key into the door. It was raining outside, thunder rumbling in the distance like some omen from above. Her heels were soaked, the hem of her suit clinging to her calves. Her shoulders ached from carrying the weight of the entire city's silence for too long. Another public hearing. Another room full of men who looked at her like she was the problem. Another set of sideways glances that told her, "You're making this harder than it has to be." But Maya had learned that justice never came easy for people like her. Especially not when you were a black woman demanding accountability from a city built to ignore you. Her fingers finally pushed the key in, the door swinging open. The apartment was dark. Malik had left a light on in the kitchen, but otherwise the place sat quiet, heavy with the kind of stillness that came after a long storm. Maya dropped her bag, peeled off her soaked blazer, and sank onto the floor right by the door, knees pulled into her chest, face buried in her arms. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't, because even now, even after the slap, the threats, the smear campaigns, she refused to give them her brokenness. She would not cry where they could see. But that didn't mean she wasn't breaking. Every day brought a new scar. Last week, someone had carved "liar" into her car door. A few nights ago, her mother had called sobbing, saying someone had come by the house pretending to be a delivery driver, asking if Maya still lived there. That same night, the doorbell to her apartment rang at 2 a.m. No one was there. Just a red envelope on the doormat. Inside, a photo of her standing at the podium during a protest. Someone had written across her face in Sharpie, "You're next." Still, she kept going. She had walked into courtrooms where her name was dragged like garbage across the floor. She had stood before city council members who tried to twist her into a villain. She had opened her inbox to find death threats from strangers who had never once heard her speak, never once asked her what happened the night she was pulled over, slapped, and arrested for daring to ask why. But she kept going. Because if she didn't, who would? Because Grant, Officer Adam Grant, was still free, still living his life while she pieced hers back together from rubble. And that day in court, when they said there wasn't enough evidence to move forward, it crushed her. It broke her. She had the footage, she had the bruises, she had the witnesses, but the system had something else. Fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of what it would mean to admit that one of their own had done what the world saw with their own eyes. That night, Maya sat on her balcony, knees to her chest, staring out at the Carverton skyline, and whispered to herself, "What else do I have to lose?" The answer? Everything. And still, She stood up the next morning, put on another blazer, walked back into the fire. She started the Justice Beyond the Badge initiative the next week, connecting victims of police abuse to legal resources and media support. She began holding town halls across the state, showing up in communities with no camera crews, no bodyguards, just her voice and her scars. One evening in Southridge, a woman stood up and said, "My daughter was raped by a cop, and no one believed her. Until you." Maya nearly collapsed in that moment, not from sadness, but from the crushing realization that her pain was shared by so many. And it lit something in her that burned brighter than fear. But then it got worse. Her younger brother Malik was arrested. They said it was for interfering with an investigation. What they didn't say was that he'd been filming a traffic stop where an officer dragged a boy from his car by his neck. They didn't say the officer was Grant's former partner. They didn't say they beat Malik so bad he could barely open his left eye. Maya got the call at midnight, drove to the precinct in a panic, only to be told, "He's in processing. He'll be out in the morning." No apology, no explanation, just another reminder that they were watching her, and they knew how to strike where it hurt. And even then, she didn't break. She bailed Malik out, held his bruised face in her hands and whispered, "They want us afraid, but we give them nothing." The next morning, she walked into a press conference, stood before a wall of microphones, and said, "If protecting my community makes me a target, then so be it. But hear me now, I'm not backing down. I will not be silent. And I will not stop until justice isn't just a slogan, but a fact." The video went viral. Millions watched her speak. Some mocked her, some praised her. But many, many saw her for the first time as more than a headline. She became a symbol. But Maya didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted her life back. She wanted safety back. She wanted peace. But peace was a luxury denied to the ones who chose to fight. Still, she fought harder. When the mayor refused to meet with her, she led 5,000 people through downtown Carverton in a silent march, holding candles and posters of the names that had been forgotten. When the police union called her a domestic terrorist in heels, she replied, "The real terror is a badge without accountability." When her name was added to a hate site's Enemies of America list, she sent the link to the Department of Justice and kept walking. And when a protest she organized was met with riot gear, she stood at the front line and said, "You can beat me, you can jail me, but you will not erase me." People are watching Maya, even now. You're watching. So if this story moves you, if Maya's strength makes your chest tighten, if her words make your heart ache, if her fight makes you believe change is still possible in a world designed to silence voices like hers, press the like button right now. Press it for every woman who was told to calm down when she was just standing tall. Press it for every brother who was beaten for filming the truth. Press it for every mother whose tears never made the news. And press it for Maya, who stood in the center of the storm and refused to fall. This fight is far from over. Officer Grant is still under federal investigation, and Maya's name is still smeared across dark corners of the internet by those who fear what she represents. But she's still here, still marching, still testifying, still living. So hit like to stand with her. Comment to let her know you believe her. And subscribe to follow this journey to the very end. Because the next chapter could be the one that finally brings her the justice she's been denied. And we need you in her corner for that. Because when Maya Ellis stood up that night in the rain, keys shaking, arms heavy, fear pressing on her like a second skin, and said to herself, "I will not be broken," she didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for all of us. Nobody in Carverton knew that before she became the face of a national movement, before the slap that shocked a city and split a system wide open, Maya Ellis once disappeared for 9 months, walking away from everything and everyone who knew her without a single goodbye, and returned with eyes sharper, colder, and more certain than anyone had ever seen. And though she never spoke of what happened during those months, some whispered she'd gone into exile. Some said she'd infiltrated law enforcement under a false name, and others, those closest to the truth, suspected she'd buried secrets so deep they were never meant to be unearthed again. But now, with the state preparing its final case against Officer Adam Grant, those secrets began bleeding through the cracks, pulling Maya back into a world she'd once vowed to leave behind, because long before she stood in front of City Hall with a bruised cheek and an iron stare, she'd walked through fire nobody saw. Fire that gave her the tools, the leverage, the connections that were suddenly waking up across the country as if summoned by fate itself. And what none of her enemies knew was that the real Maya Ellis was not just a woman who survived a slap. She was a woman who once faked her own death to expose a private security firm involved in human trafficking, who once smuggled footage from inside a black site interrogation room to a senator's private email, and who once broke into a prison under a false ID to interview a wrongly imprisoned woman sentenced for a crime a police captain had committed. And now? Now those old shadows were calling again. It started with a burner phone that rang at 3:41 a.m. The name that flashed was Nomad, a contact Maya had deleted years ago, someone who had once helped her vanish without a trace, someone she had sworn never to speak to again because of what they knew about her past. And when she answered, the voice was slow, gravelly, and terrifyingly calm. "They're digging through the files in District 6, Maya. The ones we buried. If they connect your name to Cassandra Lennox, this whole case burns." And before she could even respond, the line cut, and Maya sat in bed, heart thundering, because Cassandra Lennox was the alias she'd used during her 9-month disappearance, an alias tied to classified intelligence leaks, a name that lived in redacted documents and closed-door congressional hearings. And if the wrong person connected that identity to the woman now standing at the helm of a public police accountability movement, everything she'd built would collapse under the weight of secrets too heavy for the public to forgive. The next morning, she didn't go to her office. She took the train out of Carverton to a place she hadn't returned to in years, a cold stretch of coast near Camden, where the wind whipped hard and the ocean crashed loud enough to bury thoughts. And in an abandoned seafood warehouse down by the docks, she opened a hidden compartment behind a rusted generator and pulled out a duffel bag coated in dust, untouched for nearly 6 years. Inside were 3 old burner phones, a military-grade USB stick, a forged Homeland Security badge, and a black notebook containing names, dates, and access codes, most of which she had promised to forget. And she stood there for 10 minutes just staring at the items, weighing whether she was about to torch her own legacy just to stop Grant from walking free. But Maya knew too well. Truth without leverage dies in silence, and Carverton was still too good at pretending justice had a heartbeat when it hadn't even drawn breath in decades. So she took the bag, boarded a Greyhound bus under an assumed name, and disappeared from Carverton for 6 days. Where she went, nobody knows. Not Malik, not her mother, not even the assistant who handled her schedule down to the second. But 6 days later, she returned with eyes like steel and a document folder marked D17. And that's when the storm really began. Because the night she returned, the mayor's office was hit with a subpoena from the Federal Inspector General's office, followed by the resignation of a former deputy chief who suddenly left the country for health reasons. And then came the leak. An anonymous upload of incriminating dashcam footage from 6 years ago, showing Officer Grant not only using excessive force on a young black boy, but laughing afterward, saying, "He'll get over it." They always do. And the clip spread like wildfire, gaining millions of views in hours. But what stunned the public most wasn't the video itself. It was that the metadata revealed it came from a private security contractor's evidence locker, one no one had ever heard of. And suddenly reporters across the country were asking, who is behind this leak? And how did they get access to materials that weren't even on the city's record? Maya didn't answer, but the gleam in her eyes at the next press conference told you everything. Still, danger followed. Her apartment was broken into 2 nights later. No valuables taken, just her journal flipped open, her old IDs left in a line on the kitchen table, a silent message that someone knew and wanted her to know they knew. And for the first time in years, Maya considered running again, disappearing for good, changing her name, starting over. But when she saw the photo on her kitchen counter, one that hadn't been there the night before, a photo of her and Malik as kids, holding hands on a playground in West Carverton, smiles too bright for the world they grew up in, she knew. This fight had her blood in it, her soul in it, and there was no escape now that wouldn't feel like betrayal. So she did the unthinkable. She called a man named Elias Mercer, a former intelligence operative turned whistleblower, someone who owed her a life debt from an incident neither of them could ever speak of on record, and asked for one favor. I need surveillance on Grant's attorney, his financials, and his phone. I need everything you can get in 72 hours. Elias didn't ask questions. He just said, "You sure you want to cross this line again?" And Maya, without hesitation, said, "I never left it." When 3 days later, the data arrived, encrypted, anonymous, impossible to trace, and what it revealed was explosive. Grant's attorney had received multiple untraceable wire transfers from an offshore shell company tied to a lobbying group currently under Senate investigation for law enforcement lobbying and internal evidence suppression. And the timing lined up exactly with the judge's initial decision to block Maya's case from going to federal trial. In one move, Maya had exposed a web of corruption that extended far beyond Carverton. And yet, she still didn't feel safe. Because she knew what she'd done. She knew what she'd used to do it. And if anyone connected her past identities to her present fight, she wouldn't just lose the case, she might lose her freedom. But when she stood on the courthouse steps the next morning, folder in hand, press watching, enemies waiting, I was unsure. She didn't flinch. She said, "You wanted to know how deep this goes? I'll show you." And she handed the folder to a federal marshal who disappeared behind courthouse doors, triggering a grand jury hearing before sunset. The rest, they say, is history in motion. But the price? You haven't seen it yet. What Maya gave up to bring this truth forward. It's enough to keep her up at night, pacing the walls, wondering when the door will bust open, when the arrest will come, when her past will finally catch her. So if you're still here, still listening, drop a comment right now. Not just because she needs it, but because she deserves it. Because Maya Ellis isn't just fighting a crooked cop anymore. She's fighting the ghosts of who she used to be, the shadows she walked through, the fire she came out of without ever stopping to count the burns. If you believe she did the right thing, even if it meant crossing lines no one else would dare, comment below and tell her she's not alone. Tell her you'd stand with her in court. Tell her you'd walk beside her into the fire. And hit like if her courage floored you, because no matter what the system throws at her next, Maya is standing tall, and we need to stand with her. The truth no one knew. The truth Maya Ellis had buried beneath 1,000 headlines and 1,000 defiant speeches was that the day Officer Grant slapped her in the face wasn't the beginning of her story. It was the continuation of a long, bruising war that had started when she was just 10 years old, standing beside her mother on the side of a highway in a faded Corolla with a busted taillight, when a white cop told her mama to watch her tone and pulled her out of the car for resisting, even though all she'd done was ask if she could call her husband. And Maya remembered the way her mama's lip bled in the back seat, how the door slammed shut, and the night swallowed the road, and how even then, Maya had stared out the window with dry eyes, learning in silence what the world expected her to accept, that her skin would always come with a warning label. That fear was a language she'd have to speak fluently if she wanted to survive, and that the law wasn't built to see her, only to contain her. And it was that memory, that flame, that unhealed scar that carried her forward when years later, Grant's palm cracked against her face in the dead of night, in the middle of downtown Carverton, where the streetlights flickered like the world knew something was coming. And as the sting bloomed across her cheek, she didn't flinch because she already knew the script. She'd been rehearsing it since she was a child. But this time, she chose not to play the part they wrote for her. This time, she whispered, "You'll regret this." And she meant every word. Because by then, Maya had already seen the system from the inside out. They didn't know that. They only saw the blazer, the SUV, the brown skin, the audacity. But before the nonprofit, before the protests, before the speeches, Maya had worked quietly in the belly of the beast, interning in federal courtrooms, clerking behind the doors where prosecutors laughed at body cam footage they should have wept over, where they marked cases non-viable because juries wouldn't sympathize with that kind of victim. And Maya, back then, kept her head down, her mouth shut, her smile ready, until the day a black teen named Zaire was brought in on a resisting charge, face swollen, voice trembling, and Maya saw the arrest footage, and knew right then she couldn't play the silent insider anymore. She leaked that footage anonymously, risked everything. She was fired the next week for improper access. No one said it aloud, but she knew. They knew. And it didn't end there. She was blacklisted from every major legal job she'd trained for. Her references vanished. Old colleagues ghosted her. Rent stacked up. Her phone stopped ringing. And for a moment, for a full year, she disappeared. 9 months off the grid. 9 months of hunger, fear, moving from state to state under borrowed names and fake IDs. And in those months, she didn't just survive. She transformed. She embedded herself in the underbelly of private security firms, tracked the movement of corrupt money across departments, and created an encrypted network for whistleblowers to safely leak misconduct, the very system she would later use to bring Officer Grant to his knees. But nobody knew that yet. Not when she stood cuffed in the back of his cruiser, the red lights bouncing off storefronts as if the city itself was trying to warn him, she's not the one to play with. Not when they paraded her into the precinct, smirking, waiting for the moment her knees would buckle, waiting for her to become just another statistic with a ruined reputation. Not when she was shoved into a holding cell, still bleeding, still calm, because in her heart she whispered, "You have no idea what I've walked through to stand here now." And that's what made what happened next all the more extraordinary, because the second they found out who she was, not just a black woman with a sharp tongue, but the director of a national legal initiative, a former insider turned reformer, a woman with evidence, with allies, with a voice louder than their cover-ups, the wheels started shaking. And she pressed forward, step by step, knowing the retaliation would come hard, fast, and dirty. It did. They came after her mother's house with fake warrants. They called CPS on her cousin's kids. They tried to leak old college photos, tried to plant stories about her being unstable, irrational, unfit for public trust. They threw every filthy card they had, But Maya didn't fold. Instead, she exposed their lies in real time, built an online following of people hungry for truth, and documented every insult, every injury, every threat, and turned it into fuel. Still, the biggest risk came months later, when she learned that Officer Grant had a secret connection to a private equity firm that funded police lobbying campaigns, the same firm connected to 2 unsolved wrongful death lawsuits involving young black men. She could have walked away, could have let the case die quietly like the others. But she didn't. She flew to D.C. under an alias, met with an old contact from her undercover days, and smuggled out documents showing that Grant wasn't just a bad cop. He was part of a network designed to protect and reward brutality for profit. The evidence could spark national reform, but it came with a risk. If she went public, the firm would target her. If she stayed quiet, people would die. And still, she released the files. National media picked it up. Protests exploded. DOJ officials opened investigations. And Officer Grant, once arrogant, smug, untouchable, was now suspended, pending multiple federal charges. And Maya? She was hunted. One night, she came home to find her door kicked in, her fridge emptied, her cat missing. No sign of theft. Just a message on the wall written in permanent marker. Cassandra Lennox. Her old alias, her old life, now exposed. And she knew it was time to end this for good. So she did something unthinkable. She held a live press conference, looked into every camera, and told the entire world what she had done, who she had been, what she had risked. She told them about the undercover work, the leaks, the aliases. She told them how she'd been hunted, beaten, broken, and still rose again. And then she said the words that would echo for years. Justice doesn't ask for permission. It demands presence. I was born in this skin, and I'll die in it. But while I'm alive, I will never stop fighting for those who've been silenced by the badge, by the gavel, by the lie that says our lives are worth less than their comfort. I am Maya Ellis, and I do not fear you. The crowd roared. The system shook. And Grant, he was indicted within a week. But that's not what made the moment unforgettable. It was the silence afterward, the breath the nation took. The realization that Maya's journey wasn't just a story. It was a mirror held to every face that had ever looked the other way. A mirror held to us. So if you're still listening, if your heart is pounding, if your throat is tight, if your soul aches knowing what this woman has carried just to be heard, drop a comment right now. Let Maya know that her voice wasn't wasted. Let her know she didn't fight alone. Let her know that standing up mattered. Because while the world loves to celebrate victories, we must also honor the road to them. And Maya Ellis walked through hell to give us this truth. So if her fight moved you, if her courage lit something in your chest, press like right now. And tell her in the comments what part of her journey broke you, and what part made you believe again. Because this isn't just her story. It's ours now, too. And together, we finish it. Maya Ellis stood on the stage outside Carverton's newly renamed Justice Square, her voice steady, her hands no longer trembling, her eyes no longer searching for shadows. Because after everything she had endured, from the night a crooked cop slapped her on a dark downtown street, to the death threats, the legal battles, the betrayal by old friends and allies, the disappearances, the false arrests, and the cold silence of a system built to break her, she had not only survived, she had transformed everything that was meant to destroy her into a platform for change. And as the crowd beneath her roared her name, she knew it wasn't just her victory anymore. It was a collective triumph, a moment earned not by her voice alone, but by every person who had believed her, stood with her, fought back when the world told them to sit still. And this This right here was the kind of ending people said couldn't happen for people like her, the kind they said was too hopeful, too good, too rare. But she was standing there, living proof that hope is not a luxury. It's a necessity. And that even in the darkest hours, especially then, you must keep going, because your voice could be the very spark someone else needs to survive. It had been 6 months since Officer Grant was sentenced, convicted on all charges after his federal trial revealed the depth of his corruption, his cover-ups, and the private network of power that shielded men like him for decades. And even though the court didn't let the cameras roll during sentencing, the audio leaked. His sobbing, his begging for leniency, his desperate plea that he wasn't that man anymore. And Maya had stood quietly in the courtroom, face calm, not with satisfaction, not with vengeance in her chest, but with closure. Because after everything he took from her people, from her city, the greatest victory was knowing that she didn't need to become like him to win. She won by standing taller, speaking louder, and refusing to break, even when the world tried its hardest to grind her to dust. She had changed laws. She had ended contracts between the police and the corrupt lobbying firms that had bankrolled brutality for years. She had dismantled qualified immunity in 3 major districts. She had created a public transparency database that held law enforcement officers accountable in real time. And perhaps most importantly, she had inspired a generation of young people, especially young black girls, to believe that their voice could tear down buildings built on injustice and rebuild them into something righteous, something lasting. But she didn't do it alone, and she never forgot that. That's why, in her final address, standing beneath a banner that read, "Justice is the people's voice," Maya Ellis didn't talk about herself. She talked about every soul who lifted her up when she collapsed, every person who left a comment when she was on the brink, every hand that passed her a tissue or held her up in a crowd, every teenager who DM'd her saying, "You gave me the courage to speak," and every elder who said, "I've waited my whole life to see someone like you win." But she told them, "This victory belongs to you." Then she paused and said the words that brought tears to half the crowd. "I'm not the hero of this story. You are. And if you're hearing this now, if you're watching this story unfold, maybe days, weeks, years later, I want you to remember what Maya stood for. Not just justice, not just survival, but resistance, grace, legacy. Because what Maya went through was more than just a legal battle. It was a soul war. She walked through betrayal, through media smears, through physical assault and emotional breakdowns, and still she got back up. Again and again and again. Not because she was stronger than anyone else, but because she chose to believe that her pain wasn't the end of the story. So let me tell you something you need to carry with you after this video ends. The worst day of your life does not define you. You are more than what they label you. Your voice matters, no matter who tries to silence it. Maya's story is a reminder that even in systems designed to crush you, your truth is a weapon. Even in rooms where no one claps when you speak, your words still carry weight. Even when the whole world turns their back, your dignity remains intact. And that is a power nobody can take from you unless you give it away. So if Maya's journey moved you, even once, smash that like button right now to show the world you believe in her. Drop a comment if you've ever been silenced, pushed aside, told your fight wasn't worth it. And let Maya know she's not standing alone. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like hers again, because we don't just tell stories here. We document legacies, and we need you on this ride with us. Because you never know. The next Maya could be watching. Could be you. Could be someone you love. And they need to know that there's a community out here that sees them, believes them, and will never let their voice fade into silence. Maya's ending was not about revenge. It was about renewal. She didn't just take down a bad cop. She helped rebuild a city's faith in what justice could look like when truth walks in with its head high and refuses to kneel. And she did it while carrying every scar the system gave her like armor. She did it while remembering the little girl watching her mother bleed in a cop car. She did it with no cape, no superpower, just fire in her chest, clarity in her voice, and a community behind her that refused to let her fall. So, if you ever feel alone, unheard, like the battle is too big or the weight is too heavy, remember Maya. Remember the slap that tried to silence her. Remember how she stood, how she rose, how she turned pain into power. And then remember this, you can too. So once again, before this video ends, press like if Maya's strength gave you chills. Leave a comment to remind her and others like her that they are not alone. Subscribe to keep stories like this alive, because when we amplify voices that fight for truth, we change the world one story at a time. And to Maya, if you ever hear this, thank you. Thank you for standing when it would have been easier to fall. Thank you for telling the truth when silence would have been safer. Thank you for showing us that justice isn't some myth. It's a fight worth taking to the end. And thank you for reminding us that the most powerful thing we can ever do is stand together, loud and unbroken. Because your story, it doesn't end here. It echoes forever.